their 12-year-old daughter to the living room where she was violently raped. Wearing blue jeans, a tweed jacket and a balaclava.
He entered the parents' bedroom, demanded money, and tied the mother with copper wire.
Described as a monster, I think that's probably an actor.
He was very quietly spoken. He took off the garbage bags he had on the girl.
Police are concerned the man could be capable of murder.
They say it appears he had been watching the home and knew the teenagers were alone.
He was wearing a knitted dark green balaclava with cream stitching.
13-year-old Karmein Chan had been babysitting her two sisters in their Templestowe home when the abductor struck.
Okay, welcome back to episode 4 of the story of the Karmein Chan abduction. G'day, Jay. How are you today?
Good, thanks, Eamon. Good to be back.
Today we're going to be continuing the story of Karmein Chan. Now, before we get into Wednesday the 17th of April and Thursday the 18th of April's newspaper articles, I'd just like to clarify a few things from our previous episodes.
Okay.
Of course, we had the story of David's witness sighting, which we got a lot of feedback on Reddit. There was a lot of interest in that episode, wasn't there, Jay?
Yep, and sparked some good conversation too.
One thing I wanted to clarify was that in the last episode, Karmein Chan 3, when I was talking about John Chan, I was actually saying how some people were speculating that perhaps John Chan was in some way involved. And I just want to clarify, I don't mean that he might have been involved in the abduction himself or in the crime himself. Rather, the speculation at the time was that there was a theory that because of John Chan's business interests, that perhaps whoever had taken Karmein was someone with a vendetta against him.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and that I just want to stress that point because there's never really been any speculation that he or anyone else in the family were in any way involved in the crime itself. So there has been a couple of sources which talked about his business interests. I believe you recently came across one of these sources in one of the Underbelly series, was it?
Well, yeah, I think in Underbelly 5, John Sylvester and Andrew Rule talk about some of John Chan's business dealings and the fact that while he's very honest and hardworking, just in the course of doing business, he did have a wide circle of associates, and some of them were criminals, it was found. But that is nothing against John Chan himself. It's just the nature of being in business. You have such a wide circle of associates. So, and the other thing is, being in business, if you're a successful business person, you can make enemies. And that was all that it said in Underbelly 5.
Exactly. So, and I think that's what some of the media were speculating at the time. They were saying that perhaps whoever the perpetrator was, it was someone who had taken a grudge against John Chan.
And John Chan had no idea that his associates were criminals, to be clear. So this was unbeknownst to him.
So the other thing I was going to clarify. So in the last episode, when we talked about David's seeing this man fire a gun in Reservoir at Edgar's Creek, we were talking about bikies, and I talked about a tale of a man who had written a blog.
Yeah.
And he had talked about meeting two bikies there who had said that they had killed Karmein Chan at a barbecue in Templestowe.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, well, since then, we've found the blog in question, and I want to clarify a few things about it. So first of all, the writer's name is Sasha Uzunov, and he wrote the blog in 2011. And I'll just read it to you.
Okay.
So in 2011, I bumped into someone who I had met before and spoken to about on a wide variety of issues. As we sat down to lunch, the person, the source, mentioned to me that he had been to a barbecue some time ago in a suburb close to Templestowe. So not Templestowe, actually, a suburb near Templestowe. As the barbecue progressed, the source had been involved in a marathon drinking session with two unnamed, quote, nasty-looking blokes, end quote, belonging to a, let's just say, recreational or alleged crime association. These two, unprompted, boasted of being hired to kill Karmein Chan, but no reason was given. The informant said he believed every word that these two had said by their menacing body language. But is that enough to go on? We know that this recreation or alleged crime association has a code of conduct, an honour amongst thieves, so to speak, where children are not to be harmed in any criminal activity. Was it a freelance job, unbeknownst to the recreational or alleged crime association's hierarchy? Are these two simply making up a story and mischief-making? Police will tell you of many who falsely claim responsibility for acts of crime they never committed. So, yeah, that's what it actually said. So it doesn't use the term bikies, but certainly the context it paints, it seems to be suggesting that they were bikies. And it wasn't the writer himself who met them. It was someone he knew, and in a suburb close to Templestowe.
But, you know, in essence, the story is as we said, and it is just an intriguing little added detail about a possible link with bikies. But as you said, many have confessed to things they never did.
Interesting nonetheless. Okay, so let's get into the first newspaper article that we're going to analyse today. It was published in the Herald Sun on Wednesday, the 17th of April, 1991, titled "Tell If Karmein's OK, Police" by Louise Talbot and Michelle Coffey. Okay, so the first thing we note from this article was that it's a different photo than we've been used to seeing. So it's the first time we see this new photograph. It's a photo of Karmein skiing. I'm not sure where it's from, if it's from Mount Buller or another Australian skiing location. But at least it's more recent than the one that was doing the rounds of her from when she was 8 years old. So it also mentions in the article how now they've got 14 officers working on the case, working extremely long hours. And this is before still the Spectrum Task Force has started. And there's a reference in the article to the police being sure that the offender is watching the unfolding media reports on the abduction and that he might be feeling remorse as a result. Any feedback on that, Jay?
Well, we know that during the Nicola Lonis abduction, he watched the press conference with Nicola's parents while he was sitting there with Nicola, and he commented on it. He certainly reported on the media articles and the media coverage while he was with Nicola and said, "Think you're worth $25,000," and made a few comments like that. So I guess because of that, they're aware that he was closely following the media, and you'd have to think then that they were being quite deliberate in the messages they were putting out through some of these press conferences and media.
They also mention how they believed that the offender must have a compassionate side, as he had previously released his other abduction victims. And, you know, we're getting on for now, what is it? It's 4 or 5 days since the abduction. So hope is probably slightly fading at the same time, but they're clearly still hoping that he is going to release her. One other thing they mention is that they appeal to the public to stay away from the Chan home in Serpils Road. I wonder why they might have said that.
Yeah, unclear, but perhaps people were starting to take an interest in in things. Do you know why they said that?
Well, if it was anything like it is these days, certainly this type of story attracts a lot of people. And, only a year or so ago, there was a woman arrested and convicted for trespass in the same home, even though no one was living there. So,
Right. So from the ABC archives, we couldn't find any footage of the news from this evening. So the next article is Thursday the 18th that we're looking at. And this is an Age article called Police Fears Grow for Kidnapped Schoolgirl. As you're just saying, at this point now, time has gotten away and fears are growing. But the story, however, is relegated to page 6 and it's just one article. So that intense coverage is fading a little bit. And it talks about Inspector Sprague, who is heading the investigation, and he is saying that someone must know who the offender is. He's appealing to neighbours, hoping presumably that she is still alive and sort of seeking help from the public. There is also mention that the police are now expected to ask the state government for a reward on top of the $200,000 reward that still exists for the abductions of Sharon Wills and Nicola Linus. So this is interesting because we previously heard that the state government had offered a reward and the police they said it was too early. Is that right?
Yeah. I think it was the last episode that we did, Karmein Chan 3. The police minister had offered the reward, but the commissioner had said, it wasn't necessary now. And
okay. Do we know why they might have changed course here? Because now they're expected to ask for a reward. Well,
I mean, it just makes you wonder whether there was possible political rift between some senior police. The state government at the time was a Labor government.
So that's most of what the article covers. It also mentions that Detective Chief Superintendent Kevin Holliday, another one of the high-ranking members of the police, he was the head of the crime department, he had also made an urgent appeal to the kidnapper to please release Karmein unhomed and to get her home to her parents, and also for the kidnapper himself to go to the police and seek professional help. So perhaps, as we said, they knew that the abductor was following the news, so they were just trying everything they could with a succession of appeals in the media.
Okay, and the next article is in the Herald Sun, Fears for Karmein by Greg Tom. He points out that the 100-hour mark has been reached in the case without her being found. He writes, experts have expressed concern that while the length of time between each kidnapping has shortened, each girl has been held for progressively longer periods before being released. So perhaps police feel that this points to the offender escalating.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, that seems to be true if you look at what they believe to be the 4 canonical attacks.
In the first case, the girl, he only has a couple of hours with the girl. In the second case, he has the girl for 18 hours. Mm-hmm. The third case, 50 hours. And in this case, already 100 hours. And remember, when the media reported it on the previous 2 abductions, the police were very clear that they were very concerned about the possibility of this escalating to the point of a possible murder as well.
Yeah, and Tim Watson-Munro
as well,
said
yes.
the same thing.
The head of the investigation, Detective Inspector David Sprague, said last night police had received hundreds of calls from the public concerning the kidnapping. So he was seeing that already there's this overflow of information, and I guess this could be good and bad. Like it's obviously good to get information coming in. But at the same time, if there's too much information coming in, it could, flood them with so much information that they can't investigate the good leads properly.
Absolutely.
And we know for a fact that there were certain leads that should have been investigated more thoroughly that perhaps weren't. We mentioned David's story last week, and we also touched on a couple of other very important witness accounts, people who saw suspicious men in the lead up to Karmein's abduction. And we know that they weren't as investigated, or at least those witnesses feel they weren't as investigated as thoroughly as they should have been.
But you can see that they're appealing to the public to look at their neighbours, and you can just see how that could lead to a sort of an air of fear and people spying on each other and just reading too much into insignificant things. Yeah, and
well, we often hear the number 27,000 bandied about. Apparently 27,000 men were questioned as, not necessarily suspects. Perhaps suspect is too strong a word, but they were definitely questioned about it, which is an awful lot. Then he goes on, police said that they are hopeful a heartrending plea on Tuesday from Karmein's parents for their daughter's safe return will tug at the heartstrings of her captor. And Karmein has not been seen since 8:30 p.m. on Saturday when she was abducted. We get a lot of emails as well to our email addresses about this case, and we've had so many people contact us. Isn't that right, Jay?
yeah, it's hard enough to keep track of, and you can only imagine what the police were dealing with. Any that you're thinking of?
We get contacted by a lot of people who it's quite apparent within reading that very first email that it's not a strong lead.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's based on a hunch or a feeling or circumstantial things. Or in some cases, the person's behaviour seems erratic and strange. They bombard you with messages in quick succession. And so once you start to question whether people are, genuine, it then taints the next time someone does put in a genuine tip. So it gets hard to sort, what's real from what's not. Do you find the same?
Yeah, but at the same time, we've also been contacted by, with people with very fascinating stories or leads, and real honestly have a concern or an idea, and we really welcome those contacts, don't we?
Absolutely, and I think we've kind of alluded to a couple of them through these episodes, a couple of the eyewitness sightings, and people who have inside information into the investigation. It all helps to connect the dots. Yeah,
so we're always open to hearing the ideas of our audience.
Also in the 18th of April in the Herald Sun, there's a second article called Neighbours Watch for Clues. So picking up on this idea of a lot of tips coming into police. So it's Doncaster Police say that the Neighbourhood Watch program has helped detectives investigating the kidnapping, and they have spoken to dozens of concerned residents each day. So we presume that means residents in the area around Karmein Chan's house who have seen suspicious cars or people in the Templestowe area. We have alluded to one of those sightings in a previous episode that's likely to involve. But as time goes by, they're saying that the calls are becoming less frequent. And they talk about it's just part of the Australian psyche to help out with major cases.
On the same day, I couldn't help but notice another article in the Herald Sun by Michelle Coffey, and it was titled "Woman Fights Off Knife Attacker." And essentially, what happened was a man wearing a balaclava and armed with a 15-centimetre knife had invaded a woman's home and attempted to rape her. So she arrived home at 8:30 p.m. and the man grabbed her jaw and tried to drag her screaming into the house. Senior Detective Liz Domigan of Hampton said he tried to throw a doona over her head and he kicked her in the right knee in an attempt to drag her into the house. She bit the man on the hand, forcing him to release his grip on her face. She finally managed to break free and run to a neighbour's house. So the police believed it was a sexually motivated attack. The police found black plastic lock ties, which could have been used to handcuff the woman, and a plastic-handled knife. The man was 183 centimetres tall, wearing a balaclava and dark clothing, and may have a bite mark on one of his hands. Just astonishing that this was happening so soon after the Karmein Chan abduction. Any thoughts on this, Jay?
I think it probably just shows that these kind of attacks were happening throughout the suburbs of Melbourne, and while there are some similarities like the balaclava and the knife, there are also some notable differences here. So for mine, I wouldn't put any money on it being related, but what about you?
Yeah, well, I guess it's I mean, the woman is an adult, and that's the major difference, right?
Yeah, and coming so soon after the Karmein Chan attack doesn't seem to fit with this offender, who seems to be quite deliberate in spreading things out and a little bit less spontaneous. So this, to me, this sounds just like one of the kind of spontaneous attacks that were happening, sadly, throughout the suburbs every now and then, and it just coincidentally fell a few days after this. How about you? What do you think?
There were, in 1985, in December 1985, there were 3 attacks on women. One was in Donvale, one was in Warrandyte, and one was in Bulleen, from memory, in the space of a week. House invasions, women were raped, and as far as I know, police have never ruled out these as being Mr. Cruel. There is still a thought that perhaps it was the same man. And I just thought, this was very similar. Okay, so the ABC TV News did an interview on the Thursday afternoon, and it's with Dr. David Wells, who was the head of forensic medicine for the Victoria Police, and he had actually treated both Sharon Wills and Nicola Linus after their abductions. So we're going to play that news conference for you now.
Another day passes since Karmein Chan's disappearance, and another appeal goes out to her captor.
I would implore him to let the little girl go and allow us to start some work in returning her to a normal life.
Dr. Wells has seen it all before. He's treated 2 other schoolgirls abducted from their family homes and says it's likely the same man has struck again. He believes the man cares for his victims but doesn't understand the long-term harm he has caused.
I can only speak from having seen the other children once they have been released, seen the enormous impact it's had on them and on their families. And I'm not sure that he does know what this has done to these little kids.
According to Dr. Wells, it's not just Karmein and her family who are affected by this ordeal. It's sent shockwaves through the whole community.
Our experience in this area with other children would suggest that this is having a very untoward psychological impact on young children generally.
A small army of detectives has been working tirelessly since Karmein was snatched from her family home, searching for that elusive clue that will lead them to her abductor. But to date there's been no breakthrough, and fears for her well-being are growing by the hour.
So we just heard Dr. David Wells, who is described as a police psychologist, and he is the head of forensic medicine for Victoria Police. talking about the effect that he thinks this might be having on Karmein. What did you make of that, Eamon?
Yeah, well, he was talking about how he didn't think that the offender might even realise the effect, the trauma it would be having on both Karmein and her family. He had seen the effect it had had on previous victims, and he felt that perhaps if the offender knew how much trauma it was causing, he might return Karmein. And he also talked about the effect it was having on the wider community. And we even hear this to this day, don't we? Like, we often see commenters on Reddit or on our blogs, and they often talk about this. So this will be women now who were girls at the time, about the same age as Karmein, who are traumatized because they grew up seeing this on the news and living in fear of this man known as Mr. Cruel.
Yeah, he had an impact on his victims, their families, but also the wider community.
And Dr. Wells worked with 2 previous victims, as we said. He seems to be of the belief that, this offender has an element of empathy within him. He seems to be really appealing to that. I don't know. I wonder, did he get off on the fear that he was causing society, causing these families? I mean, in all 4 cases, he's invaded the homes of families. These are families. In the first 2 cases, he was calm enough in a situation where he had to tie up adults. And you just wonder, is he getting his kicks out of this invasion,
Yeah, well, not according to David Wells, but, he might just be addressing this to the offender, and he may have other thoughts privately, but some of his previous behaviour, if it's the same offender, did seem a little bit callous, and like when he was talking about the media reports with the previous victim, he seemed to be enjoying the fact that police were linking him to previous crimes.
He said, "You think you're worth $25,000?"
He said that, and and he also, the way he woke up a previous victim, Nicola Linus, with a knife, and seemed to be deliberately creating fear in some cases. So, no doubt it's a complex picture, but they're trying to appeal to the fact that, well, maybe there is some element of compassion based on the fact that he released the previous girls.
Yeah, I mean, don't get us wrong, this guy's a selfish asshole, but he released Nicola on her 14th birthday. I think the police thought that showed some degree of empathy.
Yeah, although he'd already planned exactly when he was going to release her, because he told her, "You'll be released in 50 hours." So whether he knew that it was her birthday or not, that might have just been a coincidence.
Okay, so next we go to Thursday, the 18th of April. Herald Sun article, Mr. Cruel Fear Stalks City.
Yeah, and that's dealing with the press conference that we just heard with Dr. David Wells, and it mentions how Dr. Wells has been talking about the abductions creating an atmosphere of mistrust and apprehension amongst all Melbourne children, and as well as the effect that it's having on Mrs. Chan and Karmein's family. And as we just said, it talks about how Dr. Wells painted a picture of the offender as a man who could respond to reason and calls for compassion based on his past actions. They don't think that the Dr. Wells says he is not a callous person capable of causing grievous physical harm. But he also says that the longer that Karmein is held, the greater the risk of permanent serious psychological damage. He also addresses the question of whether the stress could trigger an asthma attack which is something we've talked about before, and he believes that it could, in fact, do that, and he encourages the man to take the girl to a hospital if that happens. Finally, he just reiterates the point that the symptoms suffered by abducted victims who he's previously examined included chronic anxiety and an inability to feel safe.
And Dr. David Wells, Jay, so we mentioned how he treated both Sharon and Nicola when they were returned from their abductions as a psychologist. What was it he said to Nicola Linus? Because he said something, when I say he, the offender said he predicted that this would happen, that she'd be treated, didn't she? What did he say to her?
So what the offender said to Nicola Linus was, I think it was Nicola Linus, you'll be taken to a police surgeon and examined. They'll be looking for something to tie me to you, and they won't find anything.
And he used that word surgeon?
Yeah, police surgeon. I believe that's quoted in Keith Moore. So that's quite perhaps a technical term for an official police role. It's not clear if Dr. David Wells is that person. He seems to be more of a psychologist.
Yes.
So there must be another person who does the physical examination that Mr. Cruel seemed to know all about.
Yeah, so my understanding was he was treating them as a psychologist, but no doubt they would have had to have a physical inspection post-assault. So I assume that wouldn't have been his role. But it's interesting that Mr. Cruel used that word surgeon, because when I hear that word, I think of someone who performs surgery, as in an operation. It's not the type of word I would have used, when an assault victim has to go to a hospital, to be examined post-assault. It's not. I wouldn't use the word surgeon for performing that.
No, well, I don't think the common person would, but it is an official role, police surgeon, and maybe if our listeners know more about it, we'd love to hear, because the fact that Mr. Cruel predicted exactly what probably then happened, that they would be seeing a police surgeon, and if that is correct or not, it would be nice to know.
Yeah, and it could point to him having knowledge of that. It could point to a number of things. It could point to people who believed that Mr. Cruel was a member of the police force would feel like it could strengthen their theory.
Absolutely.
Others who believed that Mr. Cruel may have been someone who worked in the medical field might think the same. Similarly, people who think that he could have been a criminal who'd done this type of thing before and was familiar with what assault victims go through in these cases. Okay, Jay, so in summing up, I guess we're at the point now where 100 hours have gone, and the psychologist, his main point is the effect that this crime is having on the wider community. Yeah,
and that fear really stalking the community at this point. People starting to bring in tips, neighbours of the victims, and a climate of fear sort of gripping the city. And perhaps hope starting to fade a little bit as those calls become fewer and fewer. Thank you, listeners. If you have any questions, comments, theories, again, we're always really keen to hear them. And you can contact us at our email addresses, melbournemarvels, MELBIN, marvels@gmail.com, or on our respective websites, whoismrcruel.com, or the Mr. Cruel Reddit page is a hive of activity. It's probably how you found us in the first place.
And took their 12-year-old daughter to the living room where she was violently raped, wearing blue jeans, a tweed jacket and a balaclava.
They entered the parents' bedroom, demanded money, and tied them up with copper wire.
Described as a monster, I think that's probably accurate.
He was fairly quietly spoken. He took off the garbage bags and he had the girl.
Police are concerned the man could be capable of murder.
They say it appears he had been watching the home and knew the teenagers were alone.
He was wearing a knitted dark green balaclava with cream stitching.
13-year-old Karmein Chan had been babysitting her two sisters in their Templestowe home when the abductor struck.